Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. The video I'm making today is a video response to a recent video made by Lindybeige, by Lloyd from Lindybeige channel. He talks about Pilum, the Roman javelin, and he brings up this idea of having only one Pilum instead of duo pila. Alright, I would like to start by saying that I really like Lindybeige as a channel and I really like Lloyd as a speaker. But in this case I have to disagree. Now Lloyd, you brought up some very interesting points to back up your idea that Romans probably had one pilum instead of two. But I don't agree. I think that Romans did use duo pila, and in this video I will bring up my ideas, and please don't take it as a video where I try to prove you wrong. That's not what I'm trying to do. I am just sharing my thoughts about this, and in the meantime I would like to express all the respect that I have for you as a fellow YouTuber who has a channel which is a lot bigger than mine. Now some of the concept that he brings up is this idea of these Roman soldiers marching and having to prepare for battle in maybe difficult grounds, and so that it would be a problem to carry actually two javelins. But honestly, the Roman soldiers carried a lot of equipment, and particularly after certain reforms. Let's have a quick look to what they were actually carrying. Since you mentioned the Republic, let's talk about the Marian reforms, which, as you know, take place in 107 BC. Now, some of the things that Gaius Marius changed was the fact that each legion had a baggage train, basically one mule for every 10 legionaries, and please consider that a typical legion of this period was around 5,000 to 6,000 legionaries, servants and slaves, obviously with the fighting men divided in several cohorts. Now Marius had each man carry as much of his own equipment as he could, including his own armor, weapons and 15 days rations, for a total of 22 to 27 kilos, which would be 50 to 60 pounds of load. To make all of this easier, he issued each legionary a forked stick to carry his load on his shoulders. That's one of the reasons why they were nicknamed Muli Mariani in Latin, which means Marius mules. Now, having considered this, I think one extra javelin wouldn't have made the difference. Secondly, I think they could have carried it like this. I mean, consider that during March the scutum would have been on their back and the helmet would have been on their torso. So, for example, the Romans had the helmet here, which can be, as you can see, folded, and they carried it on their lorica, whether it be lorica segmentata, lorica hamata, lorica squamata, depends of course. So this one will be here during March, I'm saying, and I don't see duo pila, one pilum, duo pila making that much of a difference, also particularly if we consider what the actual Romans carried. Now let's briefly have a look at some Roman writers talk about the pilum. I would like to start with Vegetius. Now of course keep in mind that Vegetius is a late Empire Roman writer, and at his time pilum was already replaced by other kind of weapons, but let's still have a look because he does talk about the pilum, how it was used before. So in his work De Re Militari, in the part where it talks about drawing up a legion in order of battle, we read, "We shall exemplify the manner of drawing up an army in order of battle in the instance of one legion, which may serve for any number. They were all heavy armed troops and had helmets, cuirasses, greaves and shields. Their offensive weapons were large swords, called spata, and smaller ones called semi-spata, together with 5 loaded javelins in the concavity of the shield, which they threw at the first charge. They had likewise 2 other javelins, the largest of which was composed of a staff 5 feet and a half. The other javelin was of smaller size. Its triangular point was only 5 inches long, and the staff 3 feet and 1/2. Another possibility, reading from Julius Caesar himself, the Caesar, in De Bello Gallico, the actual book that he wrote, he says in book 5, "In that legion there were 2 very brave men centurions, who were now approaching the first ranks, Pulfio and Varenus. Then, when an inconsiderable space intervened, Pulfio throws his javelin at the enemy, and pierces one of the multitude who was running up, and while the latter was wounded and slain, the enemy cover him with their shields. and all throw their weapons at the other and afford him no opportunity of retreating. The shield of Pulfio is pierced, and a javelin is fastened in his belt. Now, this is the punchline here. In this reading here, we see that, for example, Pulfio only used one javelin, so this could have meant that he only brought one to battle. And here we are, the punchline. Because I think that they carried two during march, but only carried one in battle if the general decided to do so. So there is a huge difference between marching and going to battle. So I think that they carried two, since they did have two different kinds, and then depending on what was happening in the battle, they could choose to, for example, bring both and use both if it was the case, or if it was a very light enemy, or maybe cavalry or something very quick, then perhaps it would have been better to only carry one. It depended on the situation. That is my opinion. Also, another thing that you bring up as a point, interesting point definitely, is the fact that it would be difficult because if you have due pila, for example, you have the light one on your right hand, and you have to keep, for example, the other one here while you're holding the shield, and this could be a problem as you throw. But I don't agree with this one, because if you look at how the Pilum works, and that's my opinion here, but let's see, for what it's worth, the Pilum has a pointy ending, metal ending, in both sides. Both the side is supposed to attack and the one at the back. Why was it there? Well, my opinion is that probably if they had two, so one was in my hand, and the other one, I would have just thrust it on the ground, on the grass. That's probably what that one was there for. We don't have proof, as just as a matter of deductive logic. So that as I throw my first pilum, I can then pick up the second one and get ready to throw as the enemy comes closer in range, waiting for my centurions to give the command. One last point before we finish. We have to consider that the pilum could have also been used for close quarter combat, basically as you would use a spear. That is possible, that is mentioned. So having a second one could have been also positive for this point of view. Even if you did not end up throwing it, you could have used it as a secondary weapon before using the gladius, to sustain this idea of generals deciding before which cohortes would have only gladius and one pilum, which cohortes would have both, or simply decide which one to use depending on the battle. Alright then, I hope, noble ones, you have enjoyed my video, and I hope you, Lloyd, found interesting points here to perhaps think about. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Valete.
Erant in ea legione fortissimi viri, centuriones, cui primis ordinibus appropinquarent, Titus Pullo et Lucius Vorenus. Mediocri spatio relicto Pullo Pilum in hostes, immittit atque unum ex multitudine procurrentem traicit, quo percusso et exanimato hunc scutis protegunt, ui crusus circumvento fert subsidium Pullo. Atque ambo incolumes, com pluribus interfectis summa cum laude sese intra munitiones recipiunt, sic fortuna in contentione anteferendus videretur.